This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 425, entitled Masculist Crushing of Feminist Rage Against Masculist Rage. Description. This video predicts the next 3 phases of gender politics as the number of angry, hateful masculists rises. Feminists will be enraged by them, seeing masculist critiques against women as mere traditional misogyny, utterly missing the masculist point that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, so masculists have every right to be angry and hateful towards women. Masculists will then rage even harder against this feminist rage and crush these feminists with superior male intelligence and much greater verbal aggression, which is easily done since men are smarter than women and have 10 times higher testosterone levels than women. The monoconscious feminazis will be crushed. The flyer itself. Masculist crushing of feminist rage at masculist rage. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer is 3 steps ahead of the level of gender political awareness of the average man or woman in the street. It anticipates 3 steps or phases in gender political development that the near future will bring. That is, 1. The masculists will become increasingly angry and hateful against the massive gender injustices committed by women against men, and will lash out against them and at women for committing them. 2. The monoconscious feminists will see this male anger as mere anti-feminist, misogynist backlash against women, which will enrage them further. 3. The masculists will interpret this feminist rage as hypocrisy, as callousness towards men, since feminists are monoconscious, knowing nothing about masculist ideas, and hence are oblivious as to how women oppress men, and far worse than vice versa. This monoconscious feminist rage will then generate a crushing masculist reply using men's superior intelligence, verbal aggressiveness and science, thus crushing the rage of the feminists. Thus, as these 3 phases play themselves out, we shall see no meeting of minds. From the masculist point of view, the feminists are clueless about masculist ideas and hence interpret what the masculists are doing as merely traditional old-fashioned misogyny that the feminists have a long tradition of combating, lashing out at it with traditional feminist rage. From the masculist point of view, especially coming from those masculists who are bi-conscious, that is, have had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, the feminist rage is entirely missing the point, since the masses can see clearly that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, for example, with women's financial parasitism, women's sickening decades-long man-slavery of men, women's fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, taken over by the fluffy feminist hypocrites, etc. The masses feel that they have very good reason to be angry and hateful at fluffies and fluffy feminists. But since most feminists know nothing about masculist ideas, these feminists remain monoconscious by definition. So not surprisingly, when they hear men, that is masculists, lashing out at how women oppress men, they see this as just further evidence of misogyny, which then evokes their usual feminist rage at men for putting women down. To masculists, this feminist rage at men, lashing out against female manslavery, against the financial massacring of divorcing fathers in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, etc., seems like sheer feminazi hypocrisy. That is, that feminists expressing the attitude that it's okay for women, for feminists, to lash out at the way that men oppress women, But it's not okay for men, for masculists, to lash out at women for the ways that women oppress men, even though, from a masculist perspective, women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since women's oppression is continuous and lasts decades. The monoconscious hypocrisy of the feminists will only enrage the masculists even more, to the point that there will be millions of verbally violent shouting matches between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists in millions of meetings around the world. There will be a lot more heat than light generated in these verbally violent, hateful exchanges. How to break out of this vicious circle, where the masculists see the monoconscious feminazi bigots, that's MFBs, as utterly missing the point, misinterpreting what the masculists are saying, and hence causing masculists to see these monoconscious feminists as hateable hypocrites. Phase 1 of this three-part process is only now just getting off the ground, as the number of MGTOW and Masculist videos keeps growing, waking up millions of men that the traditional gender role of the male, of being a man-slave to a parasitic, fluffy female, is toxic, so that increasingly now more and more millions of men are wiping their hands of marriage and paternity, choosing the MGTOW lifestyle. If these men are more politically minded and want to see fundamental changes in society's gender relations and reform of the gender laws, making them fair to men, then they are more likely to be Masculists rather than MGTOWs, since the Masculists are a lot more politically angry and active than the passive, apolitical MGTOWs who merely walk away quietly from marriage and paternity. As the number of MGTOWs and Masculists grows, men will be confronting monoconscious feminists in mixed audience meetings, that is of both sexes, increasingly, and since they will be intellectually armed with masculist ideas and masculist rhetoric, they will be convinced that women vastly out-oppress men than vice versa. So that for these masculists, the constant harping of monoconscious feminists on how men oppress women will seem hypocritical and tiresome. So these biconscious masculists in the audience will hit back at these monoconscious feminists saying such things as, quote, God, we men are fed up with your feminazi bitchery. You are repulsive to men, since no man wants a relationship with a fat, ugly, unfuckable, misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi bitch. Such women are left rotting on the shelf, since they have made themselves so unattractive to men. You women oppress men far worse than vice versa, so all your harping on how men oppress women seems small potatoes to how women oppress men, with their awful financial parasitism, their hated manslavery, their fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, women's many decades-lasting gender crimes against men, for example, paternity fraud, pill lying, etc. You feminists know nothing about masculism, so remain monoconscious feminazi bigots, that's MFBs, as seen by biconscious masculists who have had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised. So you monoconscious feminists need to bother to make the effort to get off your fat, parasitic, lazy asses and learn some masculism so that you stop being monoconscious feminazi bigots, ignorant of how women oppress men. Your monoconsciousness seems hypocritical to masculists, so that we gender politically harangue you out of the room by biting your fucking head off, forcing you to listen to what the masculists have to say, or you'll be very verbally, violently crushed by very angry, hateful masculists who see fluffies as man-slaving vermin, and fluffy feminists as even worse, since it's bad enough fluffy feminists are fluffies and hence hated manslavers. But they are hypocrites as well, since they push for equal rights in the parliaments but reject equal obligations with men in the divorce courts, expecting men to pay for them after the divorce the way they did before the divorce. To masculists, fluffydom is manslavery. Manslavery is slavery. Slavery is hated. So masculists have a hatred of monoconscious, fluffy feminist hypocrites like yourself and bite your fucking head off. Masculist scientists refute most of the irrational claims of the feminists. For example, women are men's intellectual equals, or that feminists should destroy the patriarchy, which masculist scientists easily refute. Women have 10% smaller brains than men, are dumber than men by 4 IQ points, and have a 10% lower IQ variance than men, so that the morons and the genii are males, so that women have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes. Masculists aim to wipe out fluffies and fluffy feminists by punishing them so hard that they don't get a man, so are forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at for being man-slaving vermin, to be wiped out. Now, that's the end of the quote. Now, imagine how a monoconscious feminist would react to such a masculist harangue. She would see it as a supreme misogynistic outburst and not listen to the content of what the masculist was saying, but instead feel that she was being verbally violently attacked, so would react to being attacked rather than paying attention to the content of the attack. As this kind of masculist harangue against feminists in public meetings becomes commonplace, then the feminists will probably mount a collective initiative against the masculists, expressing their monoconscious feminazi rage against the masculists, which would totally miss the mark from the masculist point of view. The masculists will then combine forces and crush these raging feminists with an even greater masculist rage, since this is easy to do for masculists, since men are smarter than women and have 10 times the level of testosterone in their blood, so can be hugely more verbally aggressive than women. Once millions of men are intellectually armed with masculist ideas, masculist rhetoric, and have become conscious how women oppress men, especially with women's traditional manslavery of men, then there will be nothing to stop these newly masculisted men from exploding in rage at these raging feminists, crushing them intellectually and verbally until these women are forced to regroup and lick their many wounds. A few years from now, women, feminists, monoconscious feminists, will feel as though they have been hit by a bus, the masculist bus, forcing them to admit that there are now millions of very angry, hateful masculists who do not tolerate feminazi monoconsciousness, who put enormous moral pressure on fluffies to fip up or be forced to rot on the shelf, seen by masculists as hated manslavers. Once enough heat has been generated between the feminists and the masculists, millions of monoconscious feminists, the more intellectual ones initially, will bother to study what the masculists are saying and convert themselves into becoming bi-conscious, like the bi-conscious masculists, and thus see that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that in reality women oppress men far worse than vice versa, so that they too become impatient with the hypocritical monoconsciousness of most feminists, and expect, together with the masculists, that monoconscious feminists should convert themselves into becoming bi-conscious feminists, and to become persuaded that it would be in their self-interest to convert, since bi-conscious feminists are much less feminazi bitchy, because they've had their feminist anger at men cancelled by their female masculist anger at women, making them much more approachable by men, hence are much more likely to have a boyfriend as a bi-conscious feminist than a monoconscious feminazi bigot, whom men find repulsive and punish her by totally ignoring her, forcing her to rot on the shelf. I wonder how many years from now the above 3 gender political phases will take to become reality. Maybe only a few? ? Time will tell. There are now high school MGTOW and Masculist groups in New York, with 50 to 60 male student members who discuss MGTOW ideas, female nature, divorce, rape, etc. The first phase is thus already underway and will only grow and grow. Once it has grown enough and millions of feminists become aware of it, phase 2 will be implemented by the monoconscious feminists. With millions of men MGTOW'd and masculisted, There will be enough men to move into the third phase, crushing these monoconscious feminazis and forcing them to become bi-conscious or be punished by being forced to be manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spat at for oppressing men far worse than vice versa, hence generating real masculist rage. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 420 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.